every pound we spend will deliver for the British people.
We are poorer and we are weaker.
It's all about the money on this episode of Westminster Watch. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has made her spring statement, a sort of mini budget. And it's not the kind of statement a Labour government would usually make. A party that prides itself on commitment to welfare and workers is in fact cutting civil service jobs and slashing benefits. Let's take a look at some of the Chancellor's big announcements.
More than 1,000 people every day are qualifying for personal independence payments. 1 in 8 young people are not in employment, education or training. If we do nothing, we are writing off an entire generation. Welfare spending as a share of GDP will fall between 2026 and the end of the forecast period. The OBR have said that they estimate that the package will save £4.8 billion in the welfare budget. Because we are living in an uncertain world, as the Prime Minister has set out, we will increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, reducing overseas aid to 0.3% of gross national income. We can make our state leaner and more agile, including funding for voluntary exit schemes to reduce the size of the civil service. The OBR have upgraded their growth forecast next year and every single year thereafter. With GDP growth of 1.9% in 2026. That is the difference that this Labour government is making.
Then came the turn of the opposition parties.
The forecast for growth is down, for borrowing costs is up, for inflation is up, and business confidence has been smashed in a million pieces. This Chancellor constantly trying to blame forces beyond her control. The right response is not to duck responsibility, but to build a resilient economy. The Right Honourable Lady would have us believe that that is what she is doing. But how can we believe this Chancellor? How can we trust this Chancellor? She is the Chancellor who said she would not increase borrowing, but she did. She said she wouldn't change her fiscal rules, but she did. She said she wouldn't put up national insurance, but she did. She said she wouldn't cut winter fuel payment, but she did. She said she wouldn't tax farmers, but she did. And she said she would not move to more than one fiscal event a year, and she just has. And now we are all paying the price of her broken promises.
This has been a very divisive spring statement. Protesters are all around us here where we're broadcasting now, but it's also been divisive within Rachel Reeves' own party. I'm very pleased to be joined by Kim Johnson from the great city of Liverpool, representing Liverpool Riverside. Welcome, Kim. You've sat through the spring statement from the Chancellor. Is it fair to say that no Labour MP on the day they were elected back in 2024 would have expected to have witnessed a budget statement, which in effect this is, that did so many things that would not be expected of a Labour Party?
Well, Nick, I'd have to agree with you. To hear that we're looking at benefit cuts for sick and disabled people is, a pill too hard to swallow for me and other Labour MPs, I would imagine.
Do you think you would go so far as actually to voting against such measures if presented with the opportunity?
I've already told my constituents and other colleagues that I could not ever vote for this statement. Placing people deeper into poverty is not something I came into politics. I'm the Labour MP in the most deprived ward in constituency in the country. 47% of children in my constituency live in poverty, and this is going to make, the situation far worse for my constituents.
Labour government would say that presented with the huge levels of debt, that the government is in a tight fiscal position and that actually there is a need to not just keep people on benefits, but get people back to work. Is there not part of you that understands that mission?
What I would say, Nick, is that our country has faced 14 years of austerity. We've seen a massive crisis because of COVID, the cost of living crises. People have become sicker, but at the end of the day, disabled people have wanted to work, but the services and the infrastructure is not a place to be able to do that. But this government going after disabled people, cutting benefits to disabled people is unacceptable when there are other alternatives available. And a wealth tax for me is one of those alternatives.
The wealth tax is currently not on the government's agenda, but what they talked optimistically about today was Rachel Reeves says the Office for Budget Responsibility, by the end of this Parliament, you'll have growth of nearly 2%. Isn't that a prize worth going through now, taking some pain now for that prize?
14 years of austerity under the Tories did not work. Making cuts in this way is not going to grow our economy. However, taxing, those that have got £10 million worth of assets would bring into the Treasury 24 billion. And that money could be used, to provide free school meals, to lift children out of the two-child cap, and make the situation and life a lot better for sick and disabled people in this country.
Would you be able to say, when you're talking in the famous tea room of the House of Commons, how many of your colleagues will struggle to support the measures announced today that are going to impact on benefits and the welfare state?
Well, I would say, Nick, that most of Labour MPs should find it difficult to support it. It wasn't what we came into politics to do. It wasn't the manifesto that we won the election on. Change, change for the worse or change for the better. I want change for the better, and it should be all Labour MPs' moral duty to make things better for all of our constituents.
The government have made a big play of increasing money for defence in, let's face it, what is a precarious world situation. Do you understand the need to trade off money on defence against such things as benefit cuts?
No. If we can find money for defence, then surely we can find money to make people's lives better. We are the 6th richest economy in the world, Nick. We've got children going to school in my constituency with empty bellies. We've got public sector workers reliant on food banks. So what I would say to you, welfare, not war. Let's find the money to support those that are most sick and disabled.
One final question for you, if I may. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, set out her growth plans and her spending plans only 6 months ago in her first budget. They've proved completely wrong. Growth halved, spending targets missed. That's why she's making these cuts we've been talking about today. Is she the right person to be Chancellor of the Exchequer in the Labour government?
So Rachel has self-imposed fiscal rules, and that's exactly what self-imposed. So if she wants to change them, she has every opportunity to do so the way that Germany has. And I think she needs to consider that. But whether she is or isn't the right person for this job is not for me to say. It's well out of my pay grade.
Doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement though, Kim.
So it's well outside of my pay grade, Nick. Thank you.
Kim Johnson, Member of Parliament for Liverpool Riverside, many thanks for joining us here on Westminster Watch. Business has borne the brunt of many of the new Labour government's taxes. And I'm with today Alex Veitch, who is the Director of Policy of the British Chamber of Commerce, who are one of the largest business organisations in the United Kingdom. Alex, welcome. In your pre-budget statement, you said basically what I've just said, that there are many taxes coming down the road. Very soon indeed, business is going to bear the brunt. You wanted to see some respite from that in today's statement. Did you get any respite?
We got some indications that respite might be coming. We'd hoped to see more about exports. We had hoped to see more announcements of major projects. We'd actually would have liked to have heard something more about business rates, one of the taxes that local businesses have to pay. Instead, we got an explanation, a restatement of intent. We got a restatement of the planning rule changes, which are very important. And we got some important announcements about how SMEs, or small businesses, can get involved in the defence supply chain. So all of those things were good, but there's still more to do. And we didn't feel that today we heard quite enough to give confidence to business as we go into a difficult spring with new taxes being imposed upon them.
You must have a very good sense now of how the new taxes, people summarise it by calling it the jobs tax, a tax on employers' national insurance, is impacting on your businesses. How will they be feeling and how is it impacting?
Well, what we hear from businesses in our surveys and when I travel the country speaking to them is they are downgrading their recruitment. They're choosing not to recruit people. They're choosing to delay wage rises. They're perhaps looking at ways that they can create efficiencies in their business. So that's what we hear. We are about to enter reality where the tax changes come into force in April. So I think over April, May, June, we're going to see in reality what the impact is. And I think that's in two ways. One is how businesses approach their employment decisions, but also what happens to the tax that flows into government. And then we'll see for real whether the forecasts of the tax take actually are accurate, or perhaps whether there's less tax money coming in because businesses are just downgrading their previous forecasts of employment.
Just on one thing that you raised right at the beginning, the increase in expenditure on defence is quite substantial. The government have said, and I caution that many governments have said this in the past, that they will ensure that there is a inclusion of SMEs, small to medium enterprises, who win contracts to support this increased growth in defence spending. Given the number of years you've been working alongside businesses, do you have real confidence that government do actively put business with SMEs?
Yeah, I do. And the previous government did and this government did as well. So it's important about the defence measures is that supply chain relies on a long tail of SME suppliers, and it's a complicated business. As you can imagine, there are certain requirements around security vetting and around exports.
But don't you tend to find the big prime contractors, the BAE Systems and others, win the big contract, and then obviously their supply chain has some smaller suppliers in it. But actually that's not getting money directly into the hands of those SMEs. The big contracts are still being given to big companies. Does that put SMEs at a disadvantage?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're right about the big companies, but there has to be a flow down through the SME community. And of course, these companies have got multinational sites as well. But no, I think actually this will help. And I think a government nudge, or perhaps more than a nudge, to make sure the SMEs are involved is actually really important.
Whatever the failings of the last government, they did have members sitting around the cabinet table who were actively or had been actively in business. The Labour government is lacking a lot of practical business experience at the top of government. Is that showing, do you think?
I don't think that their own personal experience is too much of a barrier, provided they're listening to what business organisations and individual businesses they meet day to day are telling them. And I think they are listening. I think the question is, what's the so what question? What are they going to do? And in the absence of reform to the tax policies announced last autumn, we need them to build on the good work on about defence, increase the amount of SMEs and supply chain. But also what we really need them to do is give the nod to a series of major projects around the country, whether that's Sizewell C, whether that's Luton Airport, whether that's cracking on with Heathrow. And there are many more around the country. The tunnel under the Thames, HS2, Northern Railways. We actually need to see those starting to deliver, because they will also drive supply chain in counties and cities around the UK that will in turn drive growth.
And there is criticism right across the House of Commons. With Rhun Iorwerth, leader of the Plaid Cymru, very much the Welsh Nationalist Party, I think is the best way of describing you for our international viewers.
The National Party of Wales, yes.
So your take on the statement that we've heard from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves today?
Well, we've had confirmation today from the Chancellor that we have essentially a continuation of Conservative austerity under this Labour government. It's exactly what they said would not be happening, and I'm looking at it in particular from the point of view of some of the most vulnerable people in society, where you have people now who depend on safety nets from government, having that safety net taken away. And
sort of benefits we're talking about.
The benefits that people have, and there's a plan by UK government to try to get more people into work. We can all agree with that, but the way they're going about this targets people who will never be able to work and who need that support from government. And we think they're going around things in the wrong way. There are all sorts of options open to you.
Well, Rhun, having said that, there's clearly a need for the government, by choice, to stick within their fiscal rules, to try and avoid actually the interest rates and the cost of debt going up. What would you do differently?
Well, I disagree with that. Fiscal rules are looked at by governments every now and then as the global situation changes. And we say very clearly, the government should be looking at whether the fiscal rules that they have for this point in time are the right ones. The conclusion of her position on being absolutely inflexible on this is to hit some of the most vulnerable people in society. And I just don't think that should be considered as the only option.
As we continue to meet with opposition parties who've already made their views very well known in the House of Commons, I'm pleased that Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, who are topping the polls, is with me now. Richard, welcome. In your manifesto in the general election last year, you were actually going to be ruthless to spending, to public spending. Is there part of you thinks, look, this is a Labour government doing what I didn't expect them to do, and if they're cutting admin costs, if they're going to get rid of civil service jobs, this is a good thing, isn't it?
Well, in theory, yes, but they're talking the talk, but they're not actually going to walk the walk. So this is the make-believe, and what we heard in the Commons today was the theatre of make-believe. The Chancellor, who is clueless, who's not an economist, doesn't know what she's doing, totally reliant on delusional forecasts by the Office for Budget Responsibility. On one hand, they're saying that growth is going to be halved in 2025 from what they told us just a few months ago. And then next year, and the year after, and the year after that, they've suddenly magicked up a whole load of extra growth, even though they're saying that the world has changed, it's all very difficult. They're borrowing an extra £20 billion more than they forecast just a few months ago. We are heading towards a very, very difficult period in the UK. We're heading towards recession. The economy is falling. And if we keep spending more than we're earning, we're in deep trouble. We've got to scrap net zero, cut the vast amount of wasteful government spending. These are the ways that we can get the economy back on track, cut daft regulations, ludicrous regulations, make work pay, and make risk-taking pay. Too many businesses now, small business owners are saying to me, risk doesn't pay out, I'm not going to be bothered, I'm laying people off, I'm not going to hire people. This is disastrous.
But the Office for Budget Responsibility have laid out that by the end of this Parliament, with the Chancellor's current plans, that they're going to be achieving growth of about 1.9%. That's not bad, it's not great, but it's not
delusional.
bad.
Because all of a sudden they've said it's going to be 0.4, 0.5% better than they forecast last October, and yet everything else is getting worse.
But they would say that's their planning reforms.
And they've got a woeful track record of forecasting. Just 4 months ago, they said the economy would grow 2% in 2025. They've now halved that. I'm afraid government borrowing is out of control. Government spending is out of control. The bond markets have reacted very badly to this statement, and we've got to change course. But under this government, we won't.
What would that course be with you as Deputy Prime Minister of a reform government?
Scrap net stupid zero, cut vast amounts of wasteful government spending, cut dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of quangos, unnecessary departments, and do the job properly. Cut huge amounts of unnecessary civil servants and create an incentive to get back to work. The welfare bill is completely out of control. You've got to make work pay, and you've got to say to the vast amount of people who are claiming modest ailments as an online assessment, who actually are perfectly able to go to work, you've got to go to work. Work is a great thing. You should celebrate work, make work pay, and get people back into work.
Do you make work pay? In which case, literally start offering people more money, maybe raising it?
You lift the starting point at which you pay any income tax from £12,500 to £20,000. That's an extra £30 per week net to people to go to work. And that's a key difference. For too many people at the moment, it doesn't pay to go to work. It pays to sit on your backside at home and just collect the cash, which is tax-free. It's ridiculous. We've got to stop it. We've got to be robust about it.
The Labour Party have confirmed they're looking to take about 15% off the departmental budgets, and 10,000 civil servants will lose their jobs. Good thing or bad thing?
Nothing like enough, and they won't do it anyway. They talk the talk, they don't walk the walk.
One final quick question for you at the moment. Everything we've heard today could be blown off course if Nigel Farage's friend, President Trump, imposes sweeping tariffs against the United Kingdom. Do you think the government have done enough to mitigate against some of those threatened tariffs from the US?
It's a separate thing. The reality is, what we want is ideally would have a trade deal with the United States. There are many factors to play. President Trump loves the United Kingdom. Nigel Farage is a good friend of his. But ultimately, we've got to have much cheaper energy like the US enjoys. That's what drives competitiveness. That'll keep industry here. At the moment, net stupid zero is destroying industry. It's making our bills go up. It's making our cost of living go up. That's what we've got to change. That's what will affect the British people the most.
There's no bigger opposition party in the British Parliament than the Conservative Party. I'm very pleased that with me now is Kevin Hollinrake, who is on the front bench, the shadow cabinet for the Department of Levelling Up Communities and Housing. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
Well, let me ask you, you've got a reduction in aid from a Labour government. You've actually got a reduction in the civil service proposed from a Labour government, and they're cutting the benefits bill. This is a Conservative statement today, isn't it?
Apart from the reduction in growth, you mean, because I welcome some of those things, there's no doubt about it, and some of those reforms are much needed. But what we don't need right now is growth shrinking. There's a rate of growth shrinking. That's what we saw. So the Office of Budget Responsibility, who marked the Chancellor's homework, have said today growth has been halved according to their forecast. And that's not because of global events, it's what the Chancellor's done, her choices since July.
Let me just ask you though, the OBR also said, and you rightly point to what's been quite a dramatic cut in growth for this year, they also said by the end of this Parliament, we'll have growth levels of about 1.9%. Now, it's not outstanding, but it's not bad.
Well, any growth in the economy, improvement in growth is to be welcomed, but it's nowhere near what Labour committed to in opposition. They said that it would be the fastest growing economy in the G7, which would mean a growth rate of 2.5% to 3%. But look what's happened since Rachel Reeves took over. She spent 6 months talking the economy down, depressing everybody. And the thing that drives the economy forward is the confidence of private enterprise. Then she hits it with £25 billion a year of tax increases, which don't come into effect until next week. And coming down the track, which is not costed in the OBR report, are the changes to employment rights. Huge impact on business, particularly SMEs. That will deter people from investing in terms of businesses. According to the government's own figures, £5 billion a year impact on business, all anti-growth, all bad for the economy and bad for the prospects, not just of businesses, but also of people who work for those businesses.
You talked about things coming down the track. Donald Trump is going to be announcing a series of international tariffs. Do you think that the current government have done enough to mitigate the worst impact of tariffs that presumably will knock all these forecasts off course?
Well, no, clearly not. Because one thing you had, that of course global events are going to be important. Of course that will really hit our manufacturing sector, particularly automotive. That cannot be good. But what you want therefore is to make sure we've got a robust, strong UK economy. And that's not what you're seeing right now. Well, so if you look at the data here, in July last year, according to the Institute of Directors, business confidence was +5. Today, it is -65. And that's why the last quarter of last year was the worst quarter for business failures for 20 years. 220,000 businesses going under. That's not because of global events. That's not because of Donald Trump's tariffs. That's because of domestic policy choices by Rachel Reeves. She's got this completely wrong because neither her nor anybody else in the cabinet has got any business experience whatsoever. It is not governments that drive growth. It is business people, enterprises who invest their own hard-earned money in expanding their businesses and taking on new people. And that won't happen in this environment.
One final question. On the whole Spring Statement, had you been making this, your party in government been making this statement, what would you have done differently?
We'd have cut spending much more deeply. Welfare spending.
Would that have hurt more people on benefits, more people disabled benefits?
More people in work. You cannot have a situation where 1 in 4 people of working age in this country are not working.
So you're going to get right behind these benefit cuts that some say are going to affect some of the most vulnerable disabled people?
Well, you've got, since the pandemic, you've had 1 million more people of working age going to long-term sick, about half of those through mental health. Well, in my view, going to work is good for your mental health. We need to get those people back into the economy, into the productive economy. So they've got this target of about £4.5 billion of savings through that. We welcome that. We want to go further. We want about £12 billion a year of savings through that.
All off the welfare bill?
That was all off the welfare bill, getting people back into work. But people will only get back into work if there are jobs to go to. And if the private sector is not creating jobs or is afraid to take people on, there won't be the jobs for these people to go into.
Kevin Hollinrake, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on Westminster Watch. Thanks again to all my guests for joining me here on College Green outside the British Parliament. And don't forget to connect with us on X at Westminster TRT. But for now, from me and all the team here on Westminster Watch, thanks for joining us and goodbye.